Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year to 2020. Welcome to the 1 hour live KC Lau Money Tips webinar show. So this is the final episode for 2019 as we are moving into 2020. And of course, before we leap over to the next year, we want to end with the bang. That's why we have Stephen Yong on our show. All right. So basically, we have invited him here for a very special reason. So let me just give you a brief introduction of who Stephen is and why we have actually invited him here. So Steve is actually a licensed financial planner, and he is the CEO and the founder of a very good personal finance website in Malaysia, which is known as MyPF.my. So it is MyPF.my. So later after this particular webinar, you can actually check it out. Okay. And so basically that is what he does. And he's actually pretty much into fintech space. Just now have a conversation with him. It seems like he's gonna launch a personal finance app. So do stay tuned for that. And today we are gonna talk about financial plan because, 2019, I'm not too sure whether is it a good year for you or is it a bad year for you. So perhaps if let's say, for example, if you want to give us a comment, if let's say 2019 has been a prosperous for you, then perhaps you can type in a good year. So you can actually type in good at the chat box so let us know. And of course, if let's say 2019 hasn't been a pretty good year for yourself, don't worry. 2020 is going to be a much better year, a much more prosperous year. But in order to do that, we must have a plan. So that is why we have brought in Stephen Yong onto our show, whereby he's going to share with us on how we can actually craft our very own personal financial plan so that we can do well financially in 2020. So without further ado, let me just, thanks Philip. Use a bit of gel. Usually I don't do my hairdo, but thanks. So once again, without further ado, I'm going to just pass the control to Steve. So Steve, welcome to the show.
All right. Thanks, Ian, and thanks, KC Lau, for having me. It's great to be here. So it's great that everyone's tuned in as well. And yeah, I'm honored to be on the very last show for 2019. And echoing a little bit what saying that no matter how your year has been, whether it's been good, whether it's been average, whether there's room for improvement, the thing is, I think it's always important to continue looking forward and moving forward. So yeah, definitely hope that this last webinar for the year will actually help to move us all forward as we learn together into the year ahead. I'm just gonna go ahead and share my desktop, and so you guys can actually go through with me.
Yep, sure.
All right, is it coming out fine on your side?
Yes.
All right. So just a very brief introduction on why we exist. So the whole idea behind MyPF is just to make personal finances simple and to help people grow. Or so unlike a lot of companies where there's a long mission statement, it's all just very simple, just 3 words. So you can even combine it together. Our whole point of existence is to simplify and grow. And how we do that is we actually connect Malaysians with financial education content. So there's a lot of content that's free and available on our site. And also we can connect Malaysians with licensed financial planners as well. So we're actually pretty new actually, to the surprise of some. We actually officially launched in 2017. So far we have about almost 2.2 million site visits, about 1.2 million unique visitors, more than 1,000 plus articles, content published, and members, about 3,500. So, this year, among some of the things we did was to reach a wider audience in Malaysia. We started producing content in BM and Chinese as well. And we're also on various social media platforms as well. So we'll also be sharing the social media links at the end. And yeah, I'll check with Ian. So we will also be throwing in a special promo for, all of you who are watching as well. You all can actually get the special promotion, and I'll share a little bit about that right at the end of the show as well.
Oh, nice. Thank you so much.
All right. So our content is shared across. So our content is actually picked up by various media platforms. So we've been on The Star, The Age, MSN, FMT carries our articles pretty often as well. We featured Smart Investor this year as well. So we're now actually among the top 5 personal finance sites in Malaysia, and we've won a few awards along the way. But the whole idea wasn't about the awards, actually. It was really about just producing content that's good and accessible to everyone. All right. So just a little bit about myself. So as Ian introduced, so I basically run MyPF. I started as a one-man show. Right now we have a team of 15, still pretty small, but hopefully growing along the way. In addition to that, I'm actually also with a financial advisory firm. So I'm a licensed financial planner at Vantage Advisory. So I'm actually the chief knowledge officer there, CKO, but no knockouts. And I didn't make up the term CKO, it actually exists. So what I actually do is that, I actually help to share information, help knowledge both inside the firm and outside the firm, and just try to promote financial education. So it's good, like this year we saw the launch of the National Financial Literacy Strategy. So hopefully we can align and, continue to grow the personal finance space in Malaysia. Because I think as all of us know, we're still a little bit off in terms of financial education. So we definitely have some catching up to do over time. All right, so to the main meat of today. So today's learning agenda is that we want to understand the process of crafting a financial plan. So there's a lot of ways to do that, actually. I've seen people to this day still using pen and pencil, writing things down, or writing down the expenses. Maybe some of you remember that, the old ledger books with the debit, credit, and recording in there. I know a lot of you guys use Excel as well. Beyond that, there's also more customized financial planning software that's increasingly available in the market, but sometimes there may be a cost to that. So basically for today, I'm actually going to show my own Excel sheet, actually, which actually shows how you can actually put together your own financial plan that help guide you along the way. So what would be the key components that's within your plan? So to cover, everything. So for a lot of people, when we think about financial planning, for most people, they either think of two things. One, they think of budget tracking, because a lot of personal finance apps out there are basically just budget trackers, actually. And another part that people, when they think about financial planning, is investments. Now, I guess that's because a lot of people think investments are sexy, which can be undoubtedly so. But, it's actually more than just about budget tracking or investments. But, it involves a lot of different other areas as well, whether it's your risk management, your cash flow, your tax planning, your estate planning, and so on and so forth. All right. So how to craft a plan? It always starts with, having a goal or the end in mind. So you need to know where you're headed in order to break that goal down into manageable chunks over the years and achieve that. And that's really important, as quoting from Alice in Wonderland, actually, if you all know the book Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. So Alice was lost in the forest, and she met the Cheshire Cat, and she asked the Cheshire Cat, I'm lost, where should I go? And the Cheshire Cat asked Alice in return, where are you heading to? Alice replied, I don't know where I'm heading to. And guess what was the Cheshire Cat's reply? Well, if you don't know where you're heading to, then it doesn't matter whichever way you go. So, that's why it's really important to know where you are right now and where you're heading forward. We also show a very basic personal investment plan as well. A lot of times, for a lot of us, when we invest in Malaysia, it's sometimes you hear maybe a friend or a relative or an agent or someone approaches you and says, hey, this is really good, it's given this sort of returns. And then, we think, all right, sounds good, I invest a little bit here, a little bit there. And, the problem is that you end up with a hodgepodge of different investments spread across. But what's actually more important is that you actually need to have a full picture, actually, of how your investments should be like. So instead of, ad hoc getting pieces here and there, it's like you should have an entire picture in mind. And then you're putting the pieces in like a jigsaw puzzle to actually put the entire investment into one part as well. So with that as well, tied in is actually to set goals, whether it's investment goals, whether it's travel goals, because, I know for a lot of Malaysians, traveling yearly, once, maybe more than that, whether local or overseas, is part of the goals as well. Or maybe if you already have kids, young family, etc., your children's education goals might be some of the goals to kickstart off with. Yeah. And while you think that, my babies or my child is still young, 1-2 years old, but actually we look at it, it's just a blink of an eye, and 18 years old, and your child is probably aiming to go for tertiary education, whether locally or overseas actually. So there's easily $500,000 an estimate if you're going overseas. So how do you actually aim to plan for that, even starting today when your child is as young as 1 year old. All right, so for crafting my personal finances plan, so what we'll be going through is the personal finances review file, which is actually the Excel file, which I'll be sharing in a moment. We'll go through my personal investment plan. And if we have a bit of time after that, then I'll show you some of the free resources that we have available on the MyPF site. We also have resources such as the Premier membership, and also how you can get connected to a licensed financial planner as well. I'm just going to go ahead to share the Excel file, you guys. All right, so what is a personal finances review, or what is a financial plan? It's actually just how do you put together financial management. So if you're single or individual, it will be for yourself. If you're married or you're engaged with a fiance, it might be for family. And if you have kids as well, that also include budgeting, saving, and how you spend for your entire family as well. And there's really no right or wrong way to do this because every family is different. So for some couples, for example, they would have like one person acts as the finance minister. That doesn't mean that the other person is not involved. The other person still needs to be involved together. And for couples, you actually want to discuss and look at your personal finances, ideally monthly, if not at least once every 3 to 6 months actually, just to make sure that you're aligned as a family in your goals and where you're heading towards. So long-term wise, what we're looking at is just how to achieve financial freedom. So looking at the pyramid, we typically would start from the bottom itself, where the most important base is actually your savings coming in. Because when you start off with especially your investments might not be that large a pool, so your source of passive income may be minimal as you start off with. So the main source of income would probably be from your work or your salary or your business that you're running. So with that would be how do you manage the cash flow, how do you manage the various debts that you're taking on, and to avoid catastrophic emergencies from happening, such as an unexpected death or critical illness, disability. The middle portion would be the wealth accumulation, whether that's for investing towards your retirement, your own education, your children's education, or various other goals. And at the top of it would be the wealth distribution part, which in financial terms would typically be called as estate planning. So just a quick one. I know most of you know this, but just to be clear about that, estate planning has nothing to do with physical estate like an oil palm estate and all that, but it's basically just about the distribution of your wealth towards your beneficiaries upon passing. So below this would be the personal finance review process. So basically what we're looking at is that each one of us, you could view it like you're a company actually. So like, a companies would have their own cash flow statements, balance sheet, income expense statements, P&L, profit and loss statements, etc. So now you're actually doing a personal finance plan for yourself. So for myself, it will be, let's say, Steve Sendirian Berhad. Yeah. And then how would the process actually consist of? All right. So it's actually a 5-step process that typically if you actually engage an external financial planner, there's actually another step before this, which would be establishing a relationship. That means looking for a financial planner that you can trust and that you work with. But if you're actually doing on your own, then, well, you're basically depending on yourself. So you can actually jump right into the assessment stage. So the assessment, it can be a little bit time consuming, but basically it's just about consolidating and gathering all the information that's part of your financial statements. And then after that, once you have all the information, then it consists of the second part, which is setting the goals that you actually want to achieve, whether saving, investing, retirement. So one thing that I realized is that when as a licensed financial planner, when I talk to various people, we typically ask them, oh, what are your goals, what you're looking at? And, although everyone says it in a different way, but basically just about for everyone, one key goal is that for themselves, their family, they just want to, live comfortably, be able to retire comfortably, be able to maybe retire at, an age which they feel that they're still healthy. And yeah, they can actually go and do the things that they love and enjoy. So it's basically down to that for everyone. So once you have already captured your information in the first step, once you've done your goal setting in the second step, then third would actually be the plan creation. So how do you actually set the objectives and timelines and break them into manageable pieces as you go along? And the fourth stage is implementation, which is basically the execution of the various things that need to be done on a yearly or even a quarterly or monthly basis in order to achieve those goals. Because, you may have the best financial plan there is in the world, but if there's actually no implementation, then you're basically not going to get anywhere as well. And then the last step is basically a reiteration where you actually need to regularly monitor and make adjustments. So that's recommended every 6 months or at the very least once a year. So it may include things like a health check to see where you are you on track, do you need to do something about it? It may include, for example, like investments. If you have an asset allocation plan, you need to do some rebalancing if some of your investment assets are above or below or under allocated. So the various modules that we'll be looking at. So this is what you want to build into your own financial plan as well, whether you're using Excel or some other format as well. Is firstly your balance sheet. So it includes your assets, your liabilities, tracking your net worth and what's the changes. So the thing is that when you actually measure things, then it becomes much easier to visualize and easier to know, where and how you're actually going to head forward. Your cash flow statement. Quite often we think we may have an idea of how a cash flow is. For some of us, we may religiously track whether using budget tracker and all that. So for myself, I used to track my expenses religiously. I would actually track each and every single expense. This started more than 2 decades ago. I was using things like Microsoft Money, if any of you remember that. Of course, now there's a lot of different apps available as well. So basically, by actually tracking it, you actually don't need to really do it for a long-term basis if your spending is really regular. But if you, for example, if I ask you a simple question, all right, do you know how much you spend on dining and entertainment monthly? All right, so if you're not too sure, that's probably a sign that you probably want to at least track your cash flow for 3 months. So this is, because we tend to underestimate our expenses as we go along. So it gives you a better visual of, how your cash flow really is. All right. Estate planning would actually, as we talked about earlier, to how to actually distribute the estate in case of a passing, whether it's covering debt or if you have young children, how you're going to fund their education, for example, if you don't have that money already ready at this stage. Risk management, both for your personal life, whether it's life, disability, critical illness, medical coverage, etc. It's also risk management for whatever debts that you're carrying as well. Budget planning, so would be typically to budget out your entire budget for the entire year or maybe even 2 years in advance. So the whole idea behind it is that by having a budget that's already in place, every month you just want it to be, like automated, okay, this is how much I need to save, this is how much I need to pay for bills, this is how much I'm going to spend on food, etc. And this amount that, that I've put aside for savings and investing. So beyond that, you can actually blow the rest of the funds that you have and you're totally fine actually. So you just want to get that automated. So it's kind of like a really no-brainer process to go through on a month-by-month basis. Yeah? Or in other terms, you could look at it as basically paying yourself first as you proceed. Retirement planning would be looking at how does inflation, how does your expected life expectancy, how does your salary increment, how does your retirement age all come together with your investments. For those from Malaysian, your EPF savings, if you're Singaporean, your CPF savings. So how does that all come together to build up your entire retirement portfolio that you need? Investment planning, which be looking at all your various investable assets as well, finding out what's the actual internal rate of return and what should be the actual rate of return for your various investments, and how do you diversify across different asset classes, etc. And the last one is basically an action plan, which is basically to put down with a date and with a timeline all the various things that you're looking to achieve and to check it off, not only for the sense of satisfaction and having completed something and ticking a checklist, but so that you're on track on which things that you actually set out to accomplish. So we are 365 days ahead as we head into 2020. So to have that action plan out there, you know what are the key things that you absolutely must do and are a priority for you. All right, we're going to jump into the very first module, which is actually your balance sheet. All right. So basically, the things that you're looking at would actually be your assets and your liabilities. All right. So one thing that would be, I would suggest categorizing is, firstly, will be basically bank accounts, or basically things that are very liquid. So cash that you can basically access at any time. So these funds will be available in case of emergency, or if you need liquid cash for whatever reason. We have grouped fixed deposits together as well, even though fixed deposits are not totally 100% liquid. But you can actually just stop your fixed deposit, even though, for example, you're taking a longer term, 6 months or a year. Of course, you may lose some of the fixed deposit interest, but technically it's still available to you immediately. The second group would actually be paper assets. So these are basically assets that you hold. They're called paper assets because technically they are virtual, because you can't actually hold it, feel it, even today, unlike in the old days where they issued bonds and you actually had a bond paper that you could physically hold, so most of these are all electronic, online, just numbers you see on the screen, but it still forms part of your assets as well. So this will be things like, what's in your EPF balance, whether your account 1, account 2, if the other things such as endowments, annuities, retirement plans, saving plans, fixed income sources. These will be things like money market, bonds, shares, equities, unit trusts. All this will be paper assets. The third major group would actually be properties. All right. So this will be actually listing all your various properties. So one thing to note about properties is that while we actually would record the current value, you would also need to record the liabilities as well. So for example, your property would actually, the actual value would actually be still minus your existing loans that are there as well. So it's true 100 years ago, and it's still true today, that even though there's so much investments out there, there's peer-to-peer lending, there's crypto, and so on and so forth, but still down to the end of the day, paper assets, whether it's equities, bonds, and physical property, are still core components of just about every person's portfolio in one way or another. And even if you actually don't own physical property of any sort, technically, if you're contributing to EPF, some portion of it is actually put in property as well. So you do own a little bit of property as well. Or for some of you, it might be things like investing in REITs, real estate investment trusts, which actually gives you some access to properties. Other assets would be things like your insurance value, if any gold, silver, jewelry, business investments. Some people would also include things like their cars as well as an asset. You can, if you want to, not based on the purchase price, but based on what's the current market value. You can easily go online and check the current market value of your vehicle. Personally, I usually like to exclude it, as my viewpoint is that a car is basically just a liability, actually, that just depreciates over time. But you can include it if you want to. For liability side, you actually want to include things like all the various loans, whether it's from property, whether it's your own stay or investment properties, your education loan, for example, PTPN, or if you borrowed funds from any other sources as well. For credit card and retail debt, this is only if you're carrying the debt longer than 1 month, actually. So if you're the type that use a credit card maybe to max out the points or cashback, etc., but you pay off your credit card in full every month, you actually don't need to record that as a liability. All right. Outstanding tax, if you have outstanding tax, whether it's property, maybe you dispose of a property and need to pay the RPGT, or there's tax owing, whether on the personal side or business side, as well as any other loans that you would have. So you would record that. So basically, the net worth that you're looking at would actually be the total of your total assets less your total liabilities. All right. So the thing that we want to do is, if you notice here, there's actually a net worth goal. So there's actually two popular calculations of net worth, actually. So a net worth goal is basically a calculation of, at your particular age and your income levels, what should be the net worth that you have. So this calculation that we have over here, which is actually age times your annual pre-tax income divided by 10. This formula was actually came out by this Dr. Thomas J. Stanley, who was actually the writer of this New York Times bestseller, The Millionaire Mind. So some of you may have heard of that book. So basically the calculation is that at this age and income levels, this is the amount that you should have. All right. So it's actually not a competition with, or even a comparison with other people. Yeah. So you're not competing with anyone else, but just a gauge on where you should be. So for example, your net worth is 310K and your net worth goal is 310K. This would mean that you are basically an average accumulator of wealth, or a short form for that, or acronym will be AAW. If you're above that, typically you want to aim for 200%, which is twice your goal. Then you'll be known as what is a prodigious accumulator of wealth, or PAW. And if you're below 100%, you'll actually then be an under accumulator of wealth, or UAW. Right? So there's also another point to note over here, where for your net worth, if you're being conservative, you might want to exclude your primary residence, the one that you're staying in. So the viewpoint for that is that you want to actually calculate your net worth without looking at the property that you're staying in, because you're actually using it and you're not gaining any income from it. So this separate calculation will be excluding the property value of your primary property and also excluding the loan tied to that. So every year, what you can actually do is actually to track how is your net worth actually changing on a year-to-year basis. All right. So you can actually just calculate out what's the difference in the net worth. And a goal which can be challenging, but I feel is very doable, is to actually challenge yourself to grow by 20% a year in your net worth. So for some people, 20% may seem a little bit daunting, but 20% growth is very much doable, because it comes from, your savings, your investments, your EPF contributions, you're contributing to that as well. So together with that, a 20% or more goal can definitely be achieved actually by the average Malaysian if you actually set your mind towards it. All right. So for the second section would actually be your cash flow. All right. So I'll suggest actually breaking up your income into two parts, which is actually the active income and the passive income portions. So your active income would be coming from your employment income. You come from various any other allowances, bonuses that you get from your primary employment as well. And you also will want to include anything that is business or part-time income that's active actually. That means you actually play a role in it. You need to actually run it on a day-to-day basis. And for the second part will actually be passive income. All right. So this will include things from your bank interest, whether it's savings or fixed deposits, etc. It will be income from EPF, equities, PRS, rental, or any other passive income. If you actually know the actual rate of return of your various investments, then you can actually calculate out and know the actual figure. If not, you can just run a broad base on what should be the expected income. So for example, bank interest, if including FD, your average out might be about 3% in general. EPF, we were looking at the historical 20-year, but we're looking at a return of about 5.7%. Unit trust, ideally, should be 8%. Shares, you can actually aim for. That means including both dividends and capital growth. Target maybe 10, 12% kind of returns. For rental, the returns percentage can actually vary a little bit depending on the type of property, when you bought the property, etc. But for the rental, it's a little bit easier to calculate because, if you're actually renting it out, you would actually know what would be the rental amount that you're collecting. So you can actually calculate this on either a monthly basis or annual basis. So some people actually prefer annually because then they'll be able to see on a larger picture, and will include things like maybe for rental income, for example, you might be only collecting 11 months of rental income. Technically, maybe 1 month is actually used for various expenses, or you're paying an agent 1 month in fees. So, you can actually adjust according to that. All right. Next, moving into the expenses. So this is where it's helpful if you actually have an expense or a budget tracker, then you would have an idea. So you can calculate out what's your savings, your tax rate, which you can actually get from your employment slip if you're employed. If not, there's various calculators available online to calculate out your monthly tax deduction, or potongan cukai berjado. MyPF has a calculator up there as well if you need one. If you're renting a place, how much are you paying in rent, or how much are you paying for your property loan? How much are you paying for your insurance, dining, entertainment, travel, petrol bills, utilities, etc., your car loan. long-term credit card debt. For example, if you have an easy pay plan or that sort, then you put that in. How much are you giving to charity, healthcare, wife, child mate, any other loans and expenses. So you actually want to capture that in. So you can actually see what's the actual flow between your active income plus your passive income minus your expenses. So this will actually be the various categories that with a recommended value. So you should be saving, investing at least 20% of your income. So the idea is that if you really want to accumulate wealth, if you really want to achieve financial freedom, you should actually be saving, investing 40% of your income. So I know that amount can seem a little bit large, 40%, but for example, if you're already contributing to EPF, that's already giving you about 20% of your saving investment income, which means that you then just need to save another 20% to try to save and invest 40% of your income on a monthly basis. Insurance costs will be suggested to be capped at 10% or below. Depending on it, I think some insurance companies out there, they actually recommend up to 15%. But actually running through the numbers, for most people, 10% would be sufficient actually to cover all the insurance costs. And then that's if you have a family actually. If you're actually single with no dependents, typically insurance should be 5% or less of your overall income. Giving education 10%, and your spending at the very max should be no more than 60% of your total income coming in. Of course, you can cap it lower, 50%, 40%, you know, that's even better. We've seen extremes of people spending just 20, 30% of your income, which is probably easier if you're still single, young, living with your parents. But there are some people who go to the extremes as well. But the important thing, I guess, is to just try to find that balance. You don't want to be into the extent where, you know, you're scrimping and saving so much, but, you know, every day you're jiak roti, you're eating bread, and, you know, you're living off instant noodles. And there may be long-term health repercussions of that as well. So, you know, do spend, but keep it within tolerable amounts and watch out for your health as well. So this below over here, these are financial ratios. So there's a lot of various financial ratios out there, but we've picked out what I believe to actually be the 5 most important ratios to look at actually. So the first is actually the liquidity ratio. So basically how much liquid funds that you would have. So basically this would actually let you know how much emergency savings that you have. So if you're looking at the first would be actually be cash equivalents, savings accounts, fixed deposits, things that are totally liquid. So recommended to be to have 6 months, absolute minimum probably 3 months if you're single. And the part over here where it includes liquid and cash. So these liquid assets will be if you include things like your various investments like your shares and so on and so forth. So you know that, okay, in case of emergency, immediate cash, you have 10 months worth of cash. So, you know, even if you're unexpectedly laid off or something happens, you actually have that amount in store. And then if you actually liquidate the rest of your liquid or paper investment assets, you would actually have 42 months. So at least that gives you a picture in mind in case anything unexpected happens. How long can you actually last with your current cash and funds that are available as well? This number is also important if, for example, some of you are currently employed and are looking to actually start a business or maybe run a startup. You know, I would suggest at the very least to actually have 24 months or 2 years equivalent of funds available before you actually head out. Because if not, you know, when you're trying to build a business at the same time, if you're actually worrying about your day-to-day expenses and costs out there, it makes it very difficult to focus on all you need to do. So, you know, knowing that you have a 2-year or 24-month buffer that is really critical, so you can just focus on, you know, if you're looking to build your own startup or business. Next would be the savings ratio. So earlier we talked about savings. So if you're excluding your EPF, you should save at least 20%. If you include your EPF, you should be saving 35%, 40% of your income. Asset liquidity ratio is basically talking about how much of your net worth is actually in cash or actually can be liquidated. So it's quite similar to the liquidity ratio above, just that it's measured in a different form based on your overall net worth. Your debt to asset ratio is the percentage of your liabilities compared to your total assets. So the two calculations will be one excluding your primary property loan and one including your primary property loan. So the recommendation for that is your total debt, overall your asset should be no more than 20%, including your property should be no more than 35%. And last but not least would actually be the debt service ratio, or DSR. So Malaysians are more familiar with this because this will be a formula that you use when you apply for a property loan, a car loan, etc. So if including your property, your debt service ratio should be below 35%. So if you're actually wondering, like, what's the likelihood of a loan that you're applying for, let's say a property loan, etc., to be approved, what you just need to do actually is to calculate out your debt service ratio. If you actually want more accurate numbers of what's actually being tracked as debt on your side, you can request for CRIS or CITOS report. You can get it for free actually, or a very low charge at like 15 ringgit. So you can actually see all your various debt over there. So you know that if your debt service ratio is 35% or below, chances are that the loan that you're going to apply is actually going to go through. If it's between 35 to 50%, it's a maybe. So you might need to include like additional supporting documents, like maybe the amount that you have in your fixed deposits or the rental income, etc. But if your debt service ratio is above 50%, then chances are is that your loan might be rejected as well. All right. So over here, what we're looking at is that if you see over here, this chart, we're looking at passive income. So there's various definitions to financial independence. Personally, I like to define financial independence as basically, when you can fire your boss, or basically you can do anything you like without having to worry about income sources, etc. So if you broke financial independence to a two-step process, the first is when your passive income or semi-passive income combined can actually equal to 100% of your expenses. So basically all your various passive income from your various investments can actually cover all your expenses on a monthly basis. So that's the first goal or stage to hit. And secondly is when your passive income can actually cover 200% or twice your expenses. So basically at that time, you actually have the freedom to choose whether to work or not work. Although studies show that people who actually retire late and people who actually work the longest are people who actually love what they do. But basically, it gives you that freedom to choose what you do, how you spend your time, how many hours that you actually want to work in a day, without actually being tied to a paycheck or having to worry about the income coming in. So if that's one thing that I'll really suggest tracking is actually how much is your passive income actually coming and whether it's growing on a year-to-year basis. Right? So, for those who have been part of the FIRE community, the financially independent, retired early, you probably heard some comments, some of which were negative as well. Let's say people who are really striving for early financial independence, retiring early, but then after a few years, finding out that, oh no, they actually ran out of resources, ran out of income and needed to re-enter the workforce again, all right? So the thing is that it shouldn't be a singular thing that you track at one point in time, but you actually need to track what's your passive income coming in and, keep on focusing to make sure that, your expenses is kept to within certain limits. And if there's a change in expense, for example, you have a new baby or new child, or, there's a major health concern which is not covered by insurance and you need to dip into your funds, you still need to make sure that your passive income is actually twice your expenses. So it's actually a ongoing thing that needs to proceed on. So it's not a one-time thing of, I'm financially independent, but rather it's an ongoing process that will be lifelong. Next, we'll jump into the estate planning side. All right. So one of the first things to look at with estate planning is actually the funeral expenses itself. So I know for a lot of us, especially in the Asian culture, we don't like to talk about dying or death, but it's really a reality of life. As they say, death and taxes are the two things that are really unavoidable. So a funeral expense cost can be actually estimated actually. So depending on the type of funeral service that you're having, the cost would actually be different actually. So the lowest cost would actually be a Muslim funeral, and the highest would actually be a Buddhist or Taoist funeral. And in between will be a Hindu, non-religious or Christian funeral. So a good estimate is actually just to take a percentage, anywhere between 5 to 50% of your annual income. So then you can actually estimate out, what will be the funeral expense cost actually. And also importantly, who would be paying for it, whether you have set that aside or, you have actually someone who's actually going to handle that as well. And then another thing would actually be the major one would actually be the estate administration costs. So this is an estimate of the estate administration costs by the land office. So upon passing, certain things will not actually go through the estate administration process, and thus costs will not be involved. For example, in EPF, you can actually set your beneficiaries where go direct. Same for insurance, and in recent years, you can actually set your unit trust and PRS nominees as well. So this would actually bypass the estate process and go to your trust beneficiaries. But anything beyond that would actually incur costs as well on the estate value. So you actually want to figure out, what's your total value of all your estates and how much should be the estimated cost actually. So this cost would actually be an estimate on that you'll be actually be able to be completed within a year actually. So that's why it's really important to get a will written. A lot of times people think that, I'm still young, I have no dependents, But the problem with that is if you don't have a will written, then your estate distribution process might actually drag on. So with a will, it might take, say, 1 year or less. But without a will, you might be looking at 2-3 years. Or if you have extensive estate, or if it's contested by people, then it might take even longer than that actually. So there have been cases where with disputes, estates have been actually in contest for 5-10 years or longer as well. So that's why actually writing a will is really something that even if you're younger, to actually really consider doing, and especially if you have dependents, children, etc. In case something like a double tragedy occurs where both husband and wife pass away at a single time, to make sure that there's actually a guardian to actually take care of a young child, and to make sure that you actually allocate some funds to the guardian for their expenses and how much to be allocated to the child. Because if it's not spelled out, then the guardian would actually have wider access to your estate administration funds and make the decisions. So it's better if you actually set that all upfront as well, right? We have listed as emergency funds here as part of estate. So this is just in case you don't have your 6 or 12-month buffer for your emergency savings, then you actually want to allocate that as part of funds that you need to make sure that you have. Children's education. So if it's, for most people, it would actually be more on the tertiary education, unless you're actually looking to send your child to private or international school where the cost might be quite significant. This is just some ideas of how much it will cost. So local kindy might cost about 10K a year, international one 60,000 a year. Private school at a primary level, you're looking between 20 to 80,000 a year. For secondary level or high school, you're looking at 40 to 100,000 ringgit a year. And tertiary education, if you're local, you're looking at 100 to 200,000. If you're looking at overseas tertiary education, they're looking at 500,000 or more actually, depending on which country that you're actually looking to send your child to. Another part of estate planning as well will be the cancellation of all that. So basically you want to record all that you have. If it's actually shared with someone, for example, maybe your property is shared with someone, so your portion of it will actually be half. So you just want to cover the remaining portion. Besides that as well, is if you have a young child, or for example, your spouse is not working, so you're the primary breadwinner or source of income, so you actually want to budget in as well. How much would it cost to, or at the very least, until your child is technically an adult actually, so until the age of 21. So how much would that cost be? And also the last but not least will be if you have any other places that you actually want to give gifts to, or leave a bequest, etc. on your passing, then you want to list it down. All right. So over here, it's also a good idea to actually list out your assets and liabilities. So this can actually be a precursor actually to actually writing out your will. So the thought process behind that is that you want to avoid situations where someone passes away and the other party is, has to go around running at the various banks trying to figure out, where are the savings accounts being held, where are various assets and liabilities. So, to get it all listed now, it takes a bit of time, but after you've done it once, you just need to update as and when there are changes actually. And it's good that it's easily traceable as well. All right, next would actually be the risk management part. So it's actually broken into 2 parts. One is your personal coverage and one is your estate legacy and debts coverage. All right. So when you buy an insurance policy, you have either received the policy book, or nowadays you actually receive an electronic PDF copy of your policy. And within your policy, it actually has a lot more of details. How much is your basic sum assured, which is typically modern policies, your life and your total permanent disability coverage. How much is your critical illness coverage? What's your medical room and board daily limit, annual limit, lifetime limit, if any, or if it's unlimited, whether there's any personal accident coverage, whether there's any other benefits such as a premium waiver, etc. And the nominees. So you actually want to capture that all in. So at a glance, you can actually see what's your various coverage that you have. You also want to include your company policy insurance coverage as well. So typically, if you have a company coverage, you typically want to claim from your company coverage first, and then before moving on to your personal medical coverage for hospitalization and surgery. And then for below would be various, just covering out your various assets actually. So for example, your property would actually be to make sure that you can actually cover the loan amount actually, because if upon passing, your property, you might have purchased MRTA, mortgage reducing term assurance, but typically you may have purchased MRTA that may be actually shorter than the tenure of the loan. So for example, if your loan was 30 years, but your MRTA was only for 5 years, for example. So if anything happens to you, whether it's the second year, third year, fifth year, you would actually not be able to cover your full loan amount with your insurance coverage that you have. So you actually want to make sure that it matches actually, because upon passing, you cannot just continue on passing on the loan to someone else or your beneficiary. You can't sambung the loan, in other words, which means that you actually need to clear off the entire loan if you obtain financing from a bank before the property can actually be transferred actually. So you need to make sure that funds are available, otherwise that property may be repossessed by the financial institution or the bank itself, right? So you actually can do quick calculations of how much coverage that you need. So typically for life and disability coverage, you want to cover at least 5 years worth of your annual income. So the reasoning behind that is that if anything happens to you, disability, at least it can cover you for 5 years of your life, or maybe longer than that, 10 years, etc. For critical illness coverage, a recommended amount would actually be approximately 2 to 3 years of your income. So the idea behind that is what actually happens when a critical illness occurs is that, you do get paid medical leave for up to 60 days. Unfortunately, after that, companies are businesses as well, so they'll probably need to let you go. So then you need to, go for treatment, etc. And the average amount of time it takes a person to actually fully recover from a critical illness and then fully re-enter the workforce again takes 2 to 3 years. So that's why the coverage that you want to cover for your critical illness will be approximately 2 to 3 years for your critical illness. Room and board. So there's usually a sweet spot actually from medical room and board coverage. So right now in Malaysia, the sweet spot is actually a room and board of 200. So with that, you basically can get admission to just about any hospital, often 2-bedded as well. Then the cost would actually be lower, because the next jump would be a medical room and board, typically 300 per day. But the cost would actually increase quite significantly. And unless you need that VIP room or you need a room to yourself, you probably would be able to do with a room and board coverage of 200. The amount of annual limit that you should have is at least 86,000 or recommended 200,000. So if your medical policy was quite old, then there's a chance that the annual limit might be lower. But typically for today, most insurance medical policies would cover you, at least 200,000 and above. Lifetime limit, most newer policies as well are unlimited as well. So and it actually doesn't cost much actually if you have an older policy that you actually want to make those changes to. So once you've actually recorded for your own financial planning, your various policies, what's the limit, etc., then you can easily make a tweak, etc., to actually increase your annual and lifetime limit. So basically the idea for insurance is that you just want to pay as little as possible just to get the coverage that you need. Keep your investments and your insurance actually separate from one another. So the most critical coverage for most people would actually be the medical coverage, because this is the coverage that you actually would want to keep from now until your old age, whether it's 80, 90 years old, 100 years old, etc., as long as you live. While the life and disability coverage may not be that important, after your working years. So for example, if you retire, if not carrying any debt, etc., you can actually scale down the amount of coverage that you need. So I know in Malaysia, most insurance policies that are sold for the purpose of protection are actually investment-linked plans. But there's actually a lot of options as well for term insurance. There's even options for term critical illness where the costs are much lower actually. And one of the cons of term insurance is that the costs increase as you get older. But it really doesn't matter if you're actually covering until age, say, 50, 55, 60 when you retire. So a term coverage might be one of the things that you consider as well. So for example, if you see a shortfall in your coverage, you can actually look at what are the various options that's available. In Malaysia as well, basically all insurers are also required to launch a direct product, which actually bypasses the agent. So you can actually buy insurance products directly. It's still pretty limited in Malaysia. In Singapore, there's much more options. But if you do find a plan that actually meets your needs, it can be a good way to get coverage at a lower cost as well, because you're actually saving on the agent's commissions or fees as well. All right, budgeting. All right, so the first thing to actually look at will actually be your emergency savings. So as earlier mentioned, you're looking at typically if you're still working 6 months of your expenses. Of course, if you've already achieved that, then you can actually just check off this list. Other than that, you can actually look at how much other things that you actually want to budget for. So every year, you actually will look back at your cash flow for the year. What's your income? What's your expenses? So I suggest actually putting in, if you don't want to track on a daily basis, at least track on a monthly basis, how much of the income is coming in, how much are the expenses, and how much you're going to save and invest every month. This also allows you to budget for things that might be on a one-time basis, like maybe annual or biannual travel, or you have various other goals as well. And also to actually allocate for your bonus as well. So you let's say get a bonus, figure out how much that you actually want to save, invest, and how much you can spend as well. This is good as well for couples and families. So it's all discussed upfront and help reduce possible conflicts as well. So ideally, you actually want to budget for the current year and maybe even the year ahead as well. So everything's all set in place that every month your funds come in, these are the amount that you're going to save, invest, and this is the amount that you're going to set aside, etc. Right. Investments. All right. So basically for every investment, you actually want to track your various investment returns. What some people don't realize is that sometimes the way investments are reported are different from what's actually the compounding annual growth rate, or what's the actual internal rate of return. For example, your unit trusts are typically declared in annualized returns, which is actually not the actual internal rate of return. All right, so you can actually just easily calculate it out. Excel has its own internal rate of return XIRR function, which you can use as well. If not, there's various other calculators you can use to actually calculate out. So you actually want to record down what's the investment return on all your various assets, and how much is the return is. So you know that, what's the goal and what's the return that you're actually getting. For property, besides you actually be looking at the cash on cash return as well, and property appreciation. Historical appreciation in Malaysia is approximately 3.97%. But if you want to be conservative, you can estimate a 3% capital appreciation. And as earlier mentioned, more important than the individual investment itself is your overall investment asset allocation actually. So you should have your overall asset allocation, knowing how much should be in fixed deposits, fixed income, equities, property, etc., and how much you have right now. And then you can actually calculate out how is your actual weighted return. So at a glance what's your overall returns from your entire portfolio. Ideally, your entire portfolio should be looking at between 6 to 8% returns. And as earlier mentioned, even things like there are funds, things like EPF is actually broken down as well. So your EPF actually gets invested into 5% is held in cash, 50% in fixed income, 40% in equity shares, 5% property, and some other investments would be invested in other areas, for example, like commodities, gold, silver, etc. So you can actually track down, what's the amount that you actually want to allocate for the year. So then you can actually keep an updated running list of, ideally, maybe you're lacking in equities investing. So, your fund should be allocated in equities investing, whether locally, overseas, whether through ETFs or direct shares, etc. Right? If you have time a little bit, I'll show the ideal asset allocation as well by age. For retirement, you actually want to fill in your current age, your desired retirement age, and life expectancy. Usually running 85, 90 is fine for most people, but it depends on your family. For example, if everyone in your family typically lives longer, you might actually want to set on a longer retirement age. And then you factor in how inflation and all that actually affects your returns. So you can actually calculate out, for example, if you know that, okay, you know, with your current money expenses, assuming that you clear off all your debt by the time that you retire, you would need, say, you know, maybe 8,000, 10,000 on a monthly basis. So you can actually calculate out what's your current EPF contributions, what's your future EPF contributions. So if, let's say, your funds totally needed is 3.3 million, if your APF gives you 1.5 million, which means that you have actually a shortfall of 1.7 million. So then how do you actually work that backwards actually? So you know that, okay, every year, if I can actually save 30,000, if my investment returns actually keeps at this amount at 4%, I will actually be able to achieve this shortfall of 1.7 million. So there's two ways. Either you increase the amount that you invest, or you increase the amount of your investments. So basically the line that you see over here, if you can plot it out, is basically if your total funds that you have exceeds the red line, exceeds your retirement funds needed. So basically, you know, at that point of time that you would have the sufficient amount of funds needed, all right? So last but not least will be just to capture it somewhere. It can be Excel, you can write it down if you're more of the old school pen and paper type, to actually note down what are the various goals and things that you want to achieve for this year, right? I'm just going to quickly share the asset allocation. Somehow Casey Lau's webinar time seems to fly by a little bit faster than usual. All right, so this would be the asset allocation. So depending on your age, actually, so for example, if you're moderately aggressive, etc., and depending on your age, you know, you would have different types of asset allocation. So the thought process is that when you're younger, you can actually take on more risk because, you know, even if there's a market recession or depression or correction, etc., you would still have the amount of time for the market to recover and for your investments to still go on track. So you can see as, for example, if you're moderate aggressive, if you're 30 to 40s, ideally, your fixed deposits cash should not be more than 5% of your overall portfolio. Your fixed income bonds, etc., should be no more than 15% ideally. And the bulk of it, 70%, should actually be in equities. You get 5% in property. And the other will be remaining 5%. So the other will be things like gold, silver, or if you're more high risk investments, crypto, P2P lending, etc., those would all fall under other. So even if you actually lose that funds, you're still okay because the bulk of your returns still actually be growing over time as well. And you can see that the number actually decreases for equities, while it would actually increase on fixed income and property as you get older as well. I think I have time to show maybe one last thing actually.
Oh yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
All right, so this is an example of how you can actually set up your personal investment plan. So instead of trying to, you know, decide, oh, when an investment opportunity comes and, you know, should you invest in it, should you not, you know, it's better to have an overall plan. So to know that, you know, what's your starting investment amount, how much are you going to invest annually, what's your projected annual returns, how much time do you have, and how you're going to diversify actually. So diversification can be in terms of age. So as mentioned earlier, you take on more risk when you're younger and less risk when you're older. Between different investments, between different sectors, between different markets, whether how much to invest locally and overseas as well. So ideally, actually, would be to, at the very minimum, you would want to consider investing at least 30% of your investments overseas and not just in Malaysia. And this is actually on a long-term basis. And even more so as, you know, our local Malaysian equity market has actually been one of the underperforming markets for quite a number of years now. So, you know, and it's actually not that hard to get started investing overseas. So you actually want to look at your allocation. How much are you there? What are you currently invested in? What are the other options that you might be looking to invest in? Investment sectors. So this will be a representative of the equities market. So for example, in Malaysia, we're still very much in the trading services, finance sector, while in the US and global side, it's more focused on technology, healthcare. So the idea is to build a basket of shares. So if you're actually an individual stock picker, the ideal number of shares you would want to hold for diversification is actually 25 different shares. More than that, and you're actually better off just buying an index fund or an ETF actually. Less than that, and you might be under diversified. So if certain sectors are hit, then your entire performance would be significantly affected. So with the 25 stocks, you should be then splitting it out between these various sectors. So in Malaysia, 30% will be trading services companies and so on and so forth. US side. Markets, what markets are you currently invested in? What markets would you want to invest in? What would be your expected returns from different investment classes? And also important to set a goal or to tag a goal to each investment as well. So you know whether it's for retirement, whether it's for property planning, whether it's for emergency savings, to set it all aside. And then to know what's your holding period, whether is it a short term, medium term, long term, and what's the strategy that you're going to use for each type of investment. And to also key in your entry rules and your exit rules. So the thought process is that it actually simplifies the thought process of when to enter for a particular investment, when to exit as well. Because human behavior, we all know that we should buy low, sell high, but human behavior or investor psychology is, if you don't know for certain what you're going to do, is that when actually markets drop, then people tend to panic and then sell off. Or when investments start to rise and at all-time high, then everyone tries to rush and get in as well. So by having this, your personal investment plan, or some call it investment Bible, will be to actually put it all down. What's your entry and your exit for all your various investments.
I see. So, Steve, is that the end of the presentation?
Almost there. I think I'll skip the slides. So I can send the link over. I'll just jump right over here. So as earlier promised, I don't want to miss this out. So, as promised that there's actually a special sign-up promo for KC Lao members. So, we have various tools available as well. So what we're actually giving is that we're actually giving away a free 1 month, 30-day premier subscription actually. And you get a free consultation licensed financial planner. So that's worth 250 ringgit. So just go to MyPF.my/financial planning and put in the promo code KC Lao for that. Yeah. So I think we can send it over, and below would be just the various social media links that we have as well.
I see. Okay. So thank you so much again for your presentation. So let's do some Q&A before we go and have our lunch. All right. So first and foremost is that where exactly we can actually get all these files? How do we get access to them?
All right. So I'll actually go ahead and share the slides overview, and I'll select out some links and information. I actually have a video as well, so I can actually send that additional video resource available as well.
Oh, okay. I see. All right. So let's go through. We have a few questions being posted to the Q&A box. So the first one is that what's your advice on saving and maximizing savings plan scheme for people in their 30s?
All right. If you're talking about savings plans, I hope you're actually, if you're commonly referring to savings plans in Malaysia, these are typically endowments. All right. So I'm not sure if that's what you're asking, but I'll cover both. So with endowments, is actually an insurance product. It may make sense, for example, if you actually want to maximize the tax relief. For endowments, it's kind of mixed bag. The pro is that the returns can be a little bit higher than fixed deposit rates. So good endowments, you might get, or good savings plans, you might get 5-6%. But just be careful, because quite often the rate of return being stated is actually the return based on the basic sum assured, which is actually not the actual return. So you actually need to calculate out what's the actual internal rate of return of the endowment. And especially if you haven't maxed out your tax relief, for example, like upcoming year's filing of tax relief, you have a separate category for EPF and life insurance. So if your life insurance is actually not maxed out, you can actually use that. So you actually get the tax relief plus the endowments. If you were not referring to savings plan in particular, but just savings investments in general, so the idea would be firstly to set aside, how much to pay yourself first, and then to actually build up. So just now we looked at the asset allocation. So, there's various ways to actually get invested. So for example, if you actually love looking at shares, financial reports, you can actually look at picking up individual stocks. whether locally or overseas, for example, the US New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ market. But if you actually want something that's a little bit more passive, we're seeing more robo-advisories in Malaysia as well. So robo-advisories can be an option as well. There's also managed portfolios as well, which is actually a combination of both robo-advisory technology plus actually human team. So my personal opinion is that we're seeing that both robo-advisory plus humans are actually coming together, plus financial planners actually. So we're seeing actually a convergence of that now, where you get not totally technology, the bulk of it, technology does what's best in terms of screening, reviewing the investments, suggesting options, but there's still that human element there to help make sure that the investments are on track. So if you want something a little bit more passive, then managed portfolio or robo-advisory, digital wealth manager can be a good option, because it then automatically already gives you a balance between how much goes into equity and bonds, etc.
Okay, so before I go to the next question, Moose wants to ask, what is the promo code?
All right, so the promo code would actually be KC Lau 30.
So KC Law, yeah? Okay,
I can just copy that over as well, that helps.
all right. So as you do that, I'll just read out the next question.
Sure.
So this one is by Mandy Su. So she wants to clarify on these things. Insurance to repay all debts upon passing. Is it easy to get insurance to cover 100% of our loan?
Actually, it's not that expensive actually, because for example, if you're talking about loan, typically your loan would actually have a tenure, for example, 5 years, 10 years, or if let's say it's a property loan, maybe 20, 30 years, all right? So actually a term insurance is very much cheaper compared to actually getting a investment linked insurance plan actually. So it's actually not that pricey to, get 100, 200,000, 500,000 in coverage, especially if you're healthy. So no, I would not say that it's pricey here.
Okay, so next question. This one is by Kenny O. So Kenny asks, how do you record liabilities such as property loan that's where the number keeps on changing every single month as you pay down more on your loan principal? Do you update it on your balance sheet on a monthly basis, or is there a better and a more efficient way of doing this bookkeeping?
All right. Unfortunately, at the moment, it still needs to be manual. So you actually would want to actually track the changes. If you don't do it monthly, you can do it every quarterly or even half yearly. The change shouldn't be overly significant, so you can get that number. We are hopeful that in the future stage that financial apps, whether developed on our side or other parties, would actually allow for automated tracking of the liabilities and even investment values, etc. So the primary concern behind that at the moment is actually due to privacy. So technically, you could backdoor into a banking site and actually capture that information, but that's obviously illegal. So would be how there is actually technology available, just that it's not being implemented in Malaysia yet, where we should actually allow and actually fulfill the privacy requirements, PDPA, GPDR, etc., in order to automatically extract that information from your various banking accounts. So once we actually have that in place in Malaysia, then you can actually get your numbers automated. Because I understand for a lot of people, a big issue is actually keeping track of all the various changes in the numbers, etc. So yeah, hopefully we'll have an automated solution in the not too distant future.
Okay, so next question. This one, would like to know your thoughts about P2P lending and Bitcoin. So,
Right.
so the question, all right, so the comment is that most financial consultants do not want to go there. Is it because they don't invest in them, or is it because they don't earn any fees? if they don't, recommend this kind of investment products to people, because if you sell unit trusts, maybe they get some fees, but Bitcoin and P2P, they may not get any sort of fees. But anyway, what's your take on P2P and Bitcoin?
Sure. I'll talk a little bit on the financial planner and then on those two particular alternate investments. All right. So first, I guess, is to see if your financial advisor, financial planner is really a licensed financial planner. And if they're actually a fee-based financial planner, you can actually look around. some financial planners actually, for example, at my firm, a Wealth Financial Advisory for financial planning clients, is actually, if you buy unit trust through us, it's actually 0% sales charge. So we actually have no incentive to particularly push any product or solution. So it's really standing on behalf of the client's shoes. So, a good question to ask is, how much fees would they be getting if, or commissions they'd be getting if they are recommending any other particular products to help reduce the element of bias over there. As to why it's not recommended, I think generally for many older financial planners, unit trusts, bonds, funds, and all that are still very much of a mainstay. But we are seeing an increasing number of financial planners actually being more exposed to various different investment products and all that. So I think the thing is to be aware of both yourself, what you know about the investment product, what's your financial planner's interest or knowledge in that area. I'm of the stand that if you're investing in anything, or if you're recommending someone to invest in anything, you better have your own skin in the game. So on my side, I do invest in cryptocurrency, in peer-to-peer lending, etc. My viewpoint of it is that P2P lending is definitely a high risk. As you all know, if you've been in the scene, the number of default rates has been actually increasing over time. It's no surprise. I've talked to a couple of the CEOs of the various P2P companies, and all of them admit that it's something that they already knew was actually going to happen. So the whole idea is that if you are able to spread your risk, if you're using the Autobot, for example, just keep it very minimal, the amount they put in any particular investment, and factor in the possible default rate as when you're calculating out your expected returns, and keep your overall peer-to-peer lending exposure to 5% or less, and you should be fine actually. Yeah, it should give you anywhere between 8 to 10%, but yeah, it's really on the high risk spectrum. As for cryptocurrency, my key issue with it is that I personally struggle to do solid fundamental analysis, or FA, on crypto. There's a few various theories going out. Recently, Luno, with their relaunch as well, they were also saying that, they also believe that, crypto fundamentals will be a little bit more visible and calculated in the near future. Personally, I don't think it's there yet. So, for me, crypto would be something that, if, for example, you're doing it for trading purposes because of the high volatility so you actually want to trade in and out, then that's fine. It's good for trading. But for an investment, if maybe you're actually going to be holding it for very long term, maybe you have interest in crypto, then it might make sense. Other than that, I would actually wait a little bit more, because it's now, still in the midst of its wild west days, I would say, of crypto. So, I think more governments are coming on board, and as we see crypto acceptance being there, and also less manipulation for sharks on our major players on crypto, and it being more regulated and actually being used as a currency, if you're talking about cryptocurrency in particular, then that's when I would say that it's a more suitable investment for most people. But if it's something that you're interested in, you still can have a little bit of exposure there.
Okay, so I will address the final question, which is from Philip. So Philip asks, can we draw up our own wheel, or do you have a standard wheel template that we can use on?
All right. So for wheels, there are various free wheels available online as well. In fact, if you sign in for free on our site, you actually get access to that as well. The short answer is yes, but the key thing with wheels though is that it seems simple enough to write, especially if you just put everything into a residual clause. But wheels are one of those things that there's a lot of different scenarios that can happen. So, you actually want to make sure that, in your particular circumstances, you don't miss that out. For example, even things like, for example, leaving a car, for example, there's things like, if you have a vehicle, you can only leave it to a single beneficiary. You can't cut your car into half and, leave it to two different people. So, there are various scenarios that can actually happen. And because the cost of writing a will has just gone down tremendously, it's less than 500 ringgit to write a will. So personally, I used to write my own will, but after that, I decided that, at 500 ringgit, it just makes sense to get a will professionally written actually.
I see. Okay. So basically the Excel template, right, that you have presented to us. So how do we get access again for that? That one, is it like we have to pay to get it, or?
Also for that, you would need to actually just sign up using the link, and yeah, that resource and other resources would actually be provided to your site actually.
Okay, so with that, we have come to the end of today's final episode of the 1 hour live KC Law Money Tips webinar show. So once again, thank you so much, Stephen, for spending like 75 minutes of your valuable time to actually explain to us quite an all-rounded perspective on how we should actually approach when it comes to planning our finances. So once again, thank you so much, Steve. Hopefully we can actually get you back onto our show for 2020 and beyond that.
Sure, looking forward to it. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Kislau. Thanks, everyone. And yeah, really appreciate the opportunity, and Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year. But of course, by the way, okay, there's one more thing that I would like to share with you guys, which is next year, all right, the first webinar of the show, we have Daniel Kwan. So Daniel Kwan is actually, we're going to talk about creative financing. I think this one, he's more on the property side. So if you want to know about how you can actually, cash out from your own property, which is refinancing, or whether you want to get a new loan for your brand new property in 2020. So Daniel Kwan is one of the guys you can actually go to. So stay tuned for our email broadcast for our latest webinar. And once again, thank you so much, Steve. Happy New Year to you and your family. And for the rest of you guys, I will see you next year. So see you soon. Goodbye.
Bye.